A love triangle is a tangled web of forbidden emotions and volatile relationships. Such situations often bring emotional turmoil and intense conflict, sometimes escalating to threats against the physical and mental well-being of those involved. Even more chilling is when one person is unaware they've been caught in this web until it's too late. The story of Henry Stengi unfolds like a gripping detective thriller, where passion, deceit, a double life, and struggles with dependency intersect. Henry believed he had found true love with a much younger woman, a relationship that could have been considered unconventional, given their age difference. However, unbeknownst to him, the woman was simultaneously involved in another romantic entanglement. For months, she skillfully manipulated both men to achieve her own goals, until her carefully crafted house of cards collapsed. On Friday, June 1st, 2018, around 7 a.m, an amateur photographer and hiking enthusiast named Marcus was exploring the barren landscape of Joshua Tree National Park in southeastern California. As he ventured off a main trail, Marcus noticed a large flock of vultures scavenging over something. Assuming it was a carcass of a large animal, he chose to keep his distance. Equipped with a compact camera he typically used for landscape photography, Marcus decided to capture the scene of the birds circling in the desolate desert. He snapped a few photos and continued his hike, putting the unusual sight out of his mind. The following day, Marcus shared details of his hike with his wife, while transferring the photos from his camera to their home computer. As his wife examined the images, her expression changed dramatically. She called Marcus over and pointed to one of the photos. Upon zooming in, it became disturbingly clear that something resembling a human leg was partially buried in the sand beneath the vultures. Shaken, the couple promptly contacted local authorities to report what they had seen. Marcus handed over all the photos and described the exact location where he had spotted the birds. The area near one of the park's major roads was relatively easy for investigators to locate. What started as a routine discovery turned into one of the most complex and astonishing criminal investigations in recent years. About 30 feet from the roadside, a gathering of vultures and a pair of coyotes stood out in stark contrast to the desolate desert landscape. It was unusual to see coyotes scavenging in broad daylight, which immediately raised suspicion among the officers. They pulled their vehicle to the shoulder, stepped out, and approached the scene. There they found a shallow grave, hastily dug into the dry earth, less than 2 feet deep. Local wildlife had already disturbed the site, exposing its grim contents. When forensic specialists arrived to exhume the remains, it became clear this was no accident of nature. The remains belonged to a middle-aged white man, estimated to have been buried there for about a week. The body had been partially unearthed, with the lower half closer to the surface, allowing scavengers to access it. Several gruesome injuries were evident. The man's skull showed multiple fractures, consistent with blows from a heavy, blunt object. The scene painted a harrowing picture of an aggressive and deliberate act. Judging by the shallow grave's proximity to the road and its hurried construction, the perpetrator had been in a rush. If they had ventured farther into the desert and dug a slightly deeper hole, the body might have remained hidden for years. Instead, they chose to conceal the crime hastily and left the scene recklessly. Forensic analysis indicated that the crime likely occurred elsewhere. The grave contained minimal traces of blood, despite the extensive injuries, suggesting the body was transported post-mortem. This deduction pointed investigators toward the troubling conclusion that the crime was carefully premeditated, at least in part. However, despite the perpetrator's apparent haste, they had left no obvious clues or evidence for investigators to follow. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be severe, blunt force trauma to the head. The force of the blows suggested a deeply personal motive, with the attacker displaying overwhelming aggression. Investigators speculated that the crime stemmed from hatred or a personal vendetta. But the victim's identity and the story behind his death remained a mystery. Despite the body's condition, degraded by decomposition and scavenging wildlife, investigators managed to recover several fingerprints from the remains. When the prints were run through a criminal database, they yielded no matches. This lack of prior records suggested the victim had never been in legal trouble before. However, when the prints were uploaded to the Department of Motor Vehicles database, investigators were able to identify the victim. The remains belonged to Henry Stenge, a 54-year-old resident of Murrieta, a suburban city in Riverside County, California. Henry's home was about 90 miles from where his body was discovered. Investigators immediately headed to his residence, hoping to uncover answers about how and why his life had ended so tragically in the remote wilderness of Joshua Tree. Henry Stenge lived alone in a home that reflected his solitary lifestyle, a cluttered, unkempt bachelor pad. Personal belongings were scattered throughout the house, and empty pizza boxes and takeout containers littered countertops. The place lacked the warmth of a lived-in home, but showed no signs of forced entry, theft, or a struggle. It was clear that whatever had happened to Henry had occurred somewhere else. The most unsettling discovery awaited investigators in the garage attached to the house. This space, likely the scene of the crime, told a gruesome story. Dried blood spatter covered the walls, tools, and storage boxes Henry had kept there. On the floor was a large congealed pool of blood, partially smeared as though someone had attempted to clean it, but quickly abandoned the effort. In the corner of the garage lay a pile of blood-soaked rags, heavily doused with bleach, evidenced by the empty bottle discarded nearby. Near the door leading into the house, investigators found what appeared to be the weapon used in the crime. A heavy dumbbell stained with dried blood. Overhead, dangling wires suggested that a surveillance camera had been forcibly removed. Further inspection of the house revealed additional cameras, one in the living room and another in the hallway, also torn from their mounts. Whoever had committed this brutal act had knowledge of the camera placements and had taken them to eliminate any potential evidence. Unfortunately, the perpetrator left behind little for investigators to work with. There were no foreign fingerprints, no shoe prints, and no blood or DNA from anyone other than Henry. The scene seemed meticulously sanitized, leaving detectives with more questions than answers. Henry had no known legal troubles. He was divorced, lived alone, and had no apparent enemies. Neighbours described him as a quiet and friendly man, someone who mostly kept to himself, but was always polite. Yet the sheer ferocity of the crime raised questions. Who would commit such a savage act? Was it someone from Henry's past, or did it have to do with his unusual hobbies? Most troubling of all, why had no one reported him missing sooner? Henry grew up in a close-knit family, one that valued respect and strong connections. His mother and two younger sisters lived with their families in a nearby town. The family frequently stayed in touch, sharing regular phone calls and occasional visits. However, in recent months, Henry had become more withdrawn, speaking less with his loved ones and keeping details about his life to himself. His family worried about him but tried not to overreact. When he failed to contact them for about a week, they grew increasingly concerned, but decided to wait before raising an alarm. The news of Henry's violent death was devastating for his mother and sisters. Shocked and heartbroken, they immediately cooperated with investigators, offering any information they could in the hopes it would help solve the case. Henry Stenge was once a vibrant and athletic man. He loved outdoor adventures, hiking, travelling, and spending time in nature. A talented guitarist and an avid motorsports enthusiast, Henry cherished his motorcycle, a prized possession that had carried him across multiple states. But in the spring of 2014, everything changed. One day, as Henry prepared to set off on a ride, his motorcycle was struck by a pickup truck driven by an intoxicated driver. The collision was devastating. The driver dragged Henry nearly 300 feet before finally stopping. Miraculously, Henry survived, but his injuries were life-altering. The crash left Henry with severe damage to his legs, requiring multiple major surgeries. He endured months of grueling rehabilitation to regain the ability to walk. However, the physical pain persisted, and over-the-counter medication offered no relief. Doctors prescribed powerful painkillers to manage his condition, but the medication quickly led to dependency, which spiraled into a debilitating addiction. At the time of the accident, Henry had been married for over a decade, and he and his wife were raising 2 children together. His wife initially supported him, as he struggled with recovery and his growing dependency on medication. However, the strain proved too much. By 2016, she filed for divorce, taking their children and moving to a nearby town to be closer to her family. Despite the separation, she maintained cordial relations with Henry, allowing him to stay involved in their children's lives. After the accident, Henry's physical limitations forced him to abandon many of his previous hobbies. Instead, he turned his attention to his love for technology and electronics. He spent much of his time tinkering with gadgets and equipment, transforming one room of his home into a fully equipped radio studio. From there, Henry launched a podcast, using the platform to discuss current events and share his often candid and unfiltered opinions. Henry's broadcasts became a daily routine. He expressed his thoughts openly, often delving into philosophical musings or bold commentary on controversial topics. The lack of censorship in his show drew a dedicated audience, earning him both loyal fans and fervent critics. Some listeners, particularly those who disagreed with his views, began to provoke him intentionally, goading him into emotional outbursts. Clips of these tirades were recorded and shared on social media, often taken out of context to paint Henry in a negative light. In one online community for amateur radio enthusiasts, detectives uncovered a particularly hostile individual who seemed to harbour a deep grudge against Henry. This person frequently insulted Henry and posted edited clips of his broadcasts, harshly criticising his statements. Upon closer investigation, however, it became apparent that this individual's behaviour was not unique to Henry. The user had a habit of targeting various figures in the community, using the platform to demean and attack others as a form of entertainment. While their animosity toward Henry was evident, it was unclear whether this online hostility had any connection to the crime. In late January 2018, just 4 months before the tragedy, Henry Steng experienced a terrifying ordeal. According to his family, someone broke into his home in the middle of the night while he was sound asleep. The intruder entered through a window and attacked Henry with a hammer, delivering several blows to his head. Nothing was stolen from the house, making it clear that the intent wasn't robbery, but likely a personal vendetta. The attacker brought the hammer with them and took it when they left. Surprisingly, Henry didn't report the incident to the police. Instead, he took matters into his own hands by installing hidden surveillance cameras throughout his house. Whoever entered his home the second time knew about these cameras and their locations. When investigators pieced together Henry's final days, they found his last known podcast broadcast had aired on the evening of Thursday, May 24th, 2018. From that point on, there were no records of outgoing or incoming calls, no text messages, and no activity on his utilities. Neither water nor electricity had been used since that night, leading investigators to believe this was the day Henry lost his life. Detectives began their investigation by interviewing those closest to Henry. They learned that his divorce proceedings were still ongoing, despite his and his ex-wife's efforts to maintain civility for the sake of their 2 children. The couple had been locked in a heated legal battle over the house, where Henry lived after the separation. Meanwhile, his ex-wife and their children had moved in with her mother. Adding to the tension, it came to light that Henry's ex-wife had been covering the utility bills for the house. After the accident that left Henry unable to work, he survived on a small disability allowance, which wasn't enough to support himself fully. Despite their separation, she continued helping him financially. Neighbours reported that Henry's ex-wife visited him periodically, likely in an attempt to resolve their property dispute. These visits, however, often escalated into loud arguments, with the couple's shouting matches audible throughout the neighbourhood. The discord raised a crucial question. Could the mother of Henry's children have been so desperate to resolve their conflict over the house that she resorted to extreme measures? At this point in the investigation, Henry's ex-wife became the primary suspect. Detectives brought her in for questioning, where she shared a sombre account of their relationship. According to Henry's ex-wife, their marriage had once been happy and stable. But everything changed after Henry's motorcycle accident. She had done everything she could to help him recover and adapt to his new life, but the long-term use of prescription medications altered his personality, making him increasingly difficult to live with. Eventually, she felt she had no choice but to leave. Despite the separation, she continued to support him by paying his bills, ensuring he had a roof over his head. Her loyalty and financial support made it difficult for investigators to determine whether she could be capable of committing such a heinous act. The detectives had to dig deeper. While Henry's ex-wife remained a person of interest, her story painted a more complex picture, one that called for further investigation into Henry's strained relationships and hidden conflicts. Henry's ex-wife initially sought a peaceful resolution to their property dispute, but the situation took a dramatic turn when Henry introduced a young girlfriend into his life. He announced his intention to live in the house with his new partner, a declaration that ignited conflict. Overcome by his infatuation, Henry appeared to neglect the needs of his children entirely. Despite their differences, Henry's ex-wife had no apparent motive to harm him. On the contrary, she expressed pity for her former spouse. Moreover, she had a solid alibi for the day investigators believed the crime took place. She was on a week-long business trip in another state. With her cleared of suspicion, detectives turned their attention to the mysterious young woman Henry had been so enamored with. Henry's mother revealed that about 10 months before his death, her son began dating a much younger woman named Ashley Stapp, who was just in her early 20s. Neither Henry's mother nor his sisters approved of Ashley, finding her behaviour odd and her intentions unclear. Given Henry's circumstances, his age, disability, and reliance on a small disability allowance, it was hard to understand what had drawn the young college student to him. While Ashley didn't appear to be financially motivated, it was evident that she had her own reasons for maintaining the relationship. The romance progressed rapidly, raising concerns among Henry's family, who tried to warn him of potential risks. However, Henry dismissed their concerns, proudly declaring Ashley to be his ideal woman. A neighbour provided additional insight, stating that Ashley was a regular visitor to Henry's home and that they had chatted on several occasions. The neighbour specifically recalled Ashley driving a distinctive blue Chevrolet with a large dent on the rear passenger door. The day police conducted their search of Henry's home, Ashley was spotted again. Witnesses reported seeing her slowly drive past the house, appearing to observe the scene from a distance before speeding away without stopping. Her actions raised questions. If she had noticed that Henry hadn't been in touch for a week and then saw police at his house, why didn't she inquire about what was happening? Her behaviour seemed suspicious and investigators were eager to speak with her. As detectives delved deeper into Ashley's background, her social media profile revealed a startling twist. Her public photos and posts made no mention of Henry. Instead, she appeared to be in a committed relationship with another man, a young, fit US Marine. The man in question was identified as Curtis Kruger, a 30-year-old lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. Pictures of the couple together showed them embracing and smiling, with no indication of Ashley's involvement with Henry. This revelation suggested a tangled web of secrets and deceit, raising critical questions about Ashley's true intentions and the dynamics of her relationships with both men. Investigators now had to determine whether the volatile circumstances of this hidden love triangle had led to the violent crime that ended Henry's life. Curtis Kruger's military career kept him frequently on the move, spending most of his time on base with limited chances to see Ashley Stapp. Their relationship consisted largely of weekend visits, and even those weren't guaranteed. When they did manage to meet, they would often take trips out of town to enjoy each other's company in private. Occasionally, Ashley visited Curtis on base during family days and other military events, blending seamlessly into his world. The couple had even begun planning a wedding. Curtis often spoke about how Ashley was the woman of his dreams, someone he never wanted to lose. However, doubts lingered in his mind. He confided in his sister about Ashley's frequent disappearances, her refusal to answer his calls, and her lack of explanations for her absences. Suspicious, Curtis installed tracking software on Ashley's phone to monitor her movements. It didn't take long for him to uncover the truth. Curtis confronted Ashley at a gas station near Henry Stenger's home. Under pressure, she admitted where she had been spending her time and even gave Curtis the address. However, she denied being unfaithful, instead revealing a troubling secret. Ashley claimed that a hip injury she had sustained years earlier had led to a dependency on powerful painkillers. She further explained that Henry, who was also battling a similar dependency, had been trying to reduce his usage. This effort had left him with a surplus of medication, which Ashley had been taking for herself. She claimed that Henry forced her to provide something in return for the medication and accused him of abusive behaviour. Enraged by her story, Curtis took matters into his own hands. Armed with a hammer, he entered Henry's home on a cold January night and attacked him in his sleep. Curtis believed he had killed Henry and later confessed his actions to his sister, who would go on to become a key witness. Unbeknownst to Curtis, Henry survived the attack. Refusing to report the incident to the authorities, Henry assumed the assault was related to his outspoken podcasting activities. He had no idea his girlfriend and her double life were at the centre of the attack. With Curtis and Ashley as prime suspects, detectives faced a challenge. They lacked sufficient evidence to make an arrest, and both suspects could have invoked their right to remain silent and requested legal counsel, potentially stalling the investigation. To overcome this, the police devised a clever plan to catch the pair off guard, a trap that would ultimately expose the truth. First, the authorities obtained a court order to monitor Curtis and Ashley's phone conversations. Then officers visited Ashley's brother and showed him a photograph of her with Henry, asking if he recognised anyone in the image. He immediately identified his sister, but said he didn't know the man next to her. The officers explained that they were investigating a serious crime and needed to establish the identity of the man in the photo. They asked the brother to send Ashley the picture and try to find out more. Her reaction came quickly. Ashley called her brother and claimed she had no idea who the man was or anything about a crime. Shortly after, Ashley called Curtis in a panicked state. During the emotional conversation, she explained that the police had somehow connected her to the investigation. The two suspects expressed confusion over how this had happened, confident that they had covered their tracks by removing the cameras and hiding the body in the desert. While they avoided using explicit language about the crime, their discussion included specific details that only someone involved in the events would know. Both Curtis and Ashley were arrested the same day and taken to the station separately for questioning. Curtis immediately refused to speak and requested a lawyer. Ashley, however, was confronted with the recording of her conversation with Curtis. Realising there was no way to deny her involvement, she began making a confession. Initially, Ashley's statements were inconsistent and unclear. She admitted to being at the crime scene the night of the attack, but claimed she hadn't seen the attacker. According to her first account, someone had broken into the house, and Henry went to investigate, only to be ambushed in the garage. When detectives revealed evidence that both her and Curtis's phones were traced to Henry's home. On the night of the crime, Ashley's story shifted. She admitted to being romantically involved with both men for nearly 10 months. After Curtis found out about her relationship with Henry, he decided to confront him. Ashley confessed that after Curtis attacked Henry in January, leaving him severely injured, he believed Ashley would stay away from Henry. But when he learned that she continued to see him, Curtis became enraged. On the night of the crime, Curtis drove to Henry's home, where he attacked him again. Ashley admitted to helping Curtis cover up the crime. She revealed that she had shown him where Henry's surveillance cameras were located, helped him remove them, and assisted in hiding Henry's body in the desert. Finally, Ashley disclosed the location of the hammer Curtis had used in the first attack in January. This weapon, when recovered, still had traces of Henry's blood and Curtis's fingerprints, serving as critical evidence in the case. The trial of Curtis Kruger and Ashley Stapp began in August 2020. Curtis continued to deny any wrongdoing, claiming that he was defending the honour of his fiancée. His attorney argued that Ashley was the true instigator, leading a double life and manipulating both men for her own benefit. The defence also highlighted that after the brutal crime, Ashley had taken all of Henry's medications from his home for her personal use. In September 2020, Curtis was found guilty of assaulting Henry and second-degree murder and evidence tampering. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison, with eligibility for parole no earlier than 2031. Ashley accepted a plea deal, admitting to charges of evidence tampering and obstruction of justice. She was sentenced to 9 months in jail, 2 years of probation, and was required to attend treatment for her dependency issues. Ashley was released after serving just 4 months, but violated the terms of her probation and was sent back to jail to serve the remaining 5 months of her sentence. Ashley has been free for some time now, but there is no reliable information about her current whereabouts or life.